students laugh softly. There was the rustle of papers and the creak of seats as others turned and looked back at him where he sat in the center middle row. "Sir? Your pencil, Mr. Salsek," the professor said with an arched brow. "This isn't a percussion instrument class." Corbin's face flooded with heat as he realized he'd been tapping his pencil while his mind raced in agitation. "Sorry." He flipped it into the proper position for writing and aimed a quelling glance at two twittering co-eds. How did those airheads make it into Berkeley anyway? "Are we ready to proceed then, Mr. Salsek?" Professor Webster looked back at him with a faint smile. Embarrassment melted into anger. The jerk's enjoying this. Now Corbin had two reasons to feel indignant: the unfair grade and public humiliation. "Yes, sir, any time you are." He forced a dry smile and a pretense of calm disdain. By the end of the lecture, the muscle in Corbin's jaw ached from tension. He felt as though he had a 2-ton elephant sitting on his chest. He took his time stuffing his notebook into the backpack already crammed with books and 2 small binders. Thankfully, the other students cleared out of the lecture hall in quick fashion. Only 2 or 3 paused to make any remarks to Professor Webster, who was now erasing the board. Corbin kept the report folder in his hand as he walked down the steps toward the podium. Professor Webster stacked his notes and tucked them into a file folder. "Did you have a question, Mr. Salsek?" he said, putting the folder into his briefcase and snapping it shut. He looked at Corbin with those dark, shrewd eyes. "Yes, sir." He held out his report. "I worked very hard on this." It showed. There wasn't a single correction. No need. What you had there was very well presented. Then why a B and not an A? Professor Webster rested his hand on the briefcase. "You have the makings of an excellent term paper from that proposal, Mr. Salsek, but you lacked one major ingredient." How could that be? He and Ruth had both gone over the paper before he turned it in. He had covered everything. "Sir?" "The human element." "I beg your pardon?" "The human element, Mr. Salsek." "I heard you, sir. I just don't understand what you mean. The entire paper is focused on the human element." "Is that so?" Corbin stifled his anger at Webster's sardonic tone. He forced himself to speak more calmly. "How would you suggest I make it more apparent, sir?" He wanted an A in this course. He wasn't going to accept less. Sociology was his major. He had maintained a 4.0 for 3 years. He wasn't going to break that perfect record now. "A case study would help." Corbin flushed with anger. Obviously, the professor hadn't read his paper carefully enough. "I incorporated case studies, here on page 5, and more here, page 8. He had backed up everything he had proposed with case studies. What was Professor Webster talking about? "Collected from various volumes. Yes, I know. I read your documentation, Mr. Salsek. What you lack is any personal contact with those who might be most affected by your proposed programs." "You mean you want me to poll people on the street?" He couldn't keep the edge of disdain from creeping into his voice. How long would it take to develop a proper questionnaire? How many hundreds of people would he have to find to answer it? Wasn't that thesis work? He wasn't in graduate school. Not yet. "No, Mr. Salsek. I'd like to see you develop your own case study. One would do." "Just one, sir, but that one, Mr. Salsek. You won't have time for more. Add the human element, and you'll earn the A you covet. I'm sure of it." Corbin wasn't quite sure what the professor was driving at, but he could sense an undercurrent of disapproval. Was it a personality clash? Did his ideas offend? How could that be? If the programs he proposed were ever put into practice, they'd solve a lot of current problems in government systems.